Hi everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Take, the first one for the year. So welcome to everyone. It has been a very busy start to the year for most of us. I've been catching up with clients and candidates, and everyone is telling me that they are pretty busy, which is potentially kind of what we had planned, or what I thought was going to happen, if that makes sense. We started to see a little bit of momentum start picking up probably around sort of early December. And look, there's a couple of things that lead to sort of change and momentum in the market. I think a lot of organisations have literally, taken their restructuring probably to the nth degree in terms of cutting quite deep. So, every HR practitioner probably for the last 2 years has done at least one restructure, and that's partly been due to cost constraints, et cetera, et cetera. So it's great to see a little bit of momentum coming back into the market. So that's been great to see. So this time of year is actually typically the craziest time of the year in terms of the job hunt and the job market. So for those that are looking at the moment, this is the right time to be looking. Generally speaking, the 1st of February, I've said every year, I can always set my clock by it because that is when everyone starts blowing up my phone and saying, hey, how's the market looking? That happens for a couple of reasons. Generally because people have had a bit of a holiday, school's gone back, everyone tends to come back to work, and they essentially are in a situation where, gee whiz, nothing's changed, I really need to look at making a move. So that's great because we like activity in the market, we like people to be obviously moving and creating opportunities and vacancies, and particularly at the executive end. The reality is nobody just creates a 300 or a 400k role out of thin air. Somebody's sitting in it and we need them to move. So we like to see that momentum and that movement. Obviously people will only move roles and only look for a new role if they feel like there's a degree of confidence in the market. And I think off the back of those, 2 years of probably a bit of austerity where really businesses have been watching the bottom line, where it's been super focused on risk, governance, compliance, I think everyone's ready for a little bit of a shift and a change. So what's been really pleasing to see is the return of some of the specialist roles. We literally have not seen them for a very long time. So if you're in the TA field, you will no doubt have felt that. TA is one of those specialisations that tends to be a fair with a friend, you might say. So during hiring booms, we're talking the pandemic, it was absolutely the most in-demand skill set, hiring recruiters to hire staff, because obviously there was such a skills shortage. Then, of course, when things start to sort of slow down, organisations tend to go, well, we're not hiring, so why don't we need a TA team? Very, shall we say, short-sighted, but that's generally what happens. So what I think we're seeing, particularly in the talent acquisition space, is a return to probably the post-GFC days. So people that are old enough to remember. After that event, 2008, we saw a lot of interim and contract TA roles come back to the market. Organisations obviously are a little wary of hiring permanently in the TA space. So literally this year, we've had probably half a dozen briefs where organisations are needing a temporary TA resource just to come in and help them through maybe just a seasonal hiring, or they need someone for a 12-month period, 6-month period. So some really good news for the TA front in that regard. So that's always a positive sign. I think that'll probably continue. And in the L&OD arena, again, really great news to see a lot of roles coming to the market. And I'd say, look, they're mostly coming in at the sub 200k market. So, again, the market heats up from the bottom. So it's natural that the executive end is still going to take a little while to heat up. That's natural. There's obviously, there's not always dozens of roles above that 300k mark. That's just more of a kind of a timing thing. So cutting back to sort of the L&OD area, this has been because we know that organisations haven't been investing in their people, in their leadership, all of that kind of thing. So it's really, really great to see that happening. That's been a really interesting space because organisations, and it kind of struck me as quite odd that, in the last couple of years, organisations haven't been really kind of dialing into that sort of OD capability, workforce planning, kind of talent management space, because we know that there is so much disruption in the market at the moment. We know that AI is going to impact jobs. We know that the jobs of the future are going to look super different. So what I think organisations have suddenly realised, and my theory, only a theory, but the theory is that if you think about it, organizations have all this talent. They've got all of these people who have incredible IP and knowledge, but the reality is the jobs that they do might look quite differently. So you've got a cohort of all these people with diverse skill sets, but the challenge is the jobs that they will do and the structures and the business units and how everything operates is going to look really, really different. So my my take is that organizations probably really need to do that skills audit in terms of what have we got and how do we then actually leverage that? Because it might mean that, people that work in this function, their skills could be better utilized in another area. So I think there's a really big focus now on that, workforce planning, that succession. There's going to be a lot of, people exiting the market in, the next 5 to 10 years. Are we ensuring that that knowledge and that IP is being passed down? So great to see that org development is back in the agenda, because I know that there's a lot of people in their roles that just feel that they're not getting any development either. So that's a massive thing. Obviously, leadership is really hard. It's particularly hard at the mid-level because obviously managing people is complex. So those of you who are leading, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Just a reminder, we do have a anonymous link if you want to submit a question. We've already got a heap of questions, but if there's something burning that you're like, oh, I want to ask that, please pop that either through the anonymous link or you can just pop it in the chat. And we'll pick it up that way. So just a reminder to pop your questions in if you haven't already done that. So again, if we're looking at sort of what's happening in that sort of market, the business partner market, that's really starting to heat up. That has been very busy. Obviously, they're the people that are doing the boots on the ground stuff. So that 120, 130, 140, 150, 160 kind of, package mark, those roles, they're just consistently kind of coming through. I think the positive is that we are definitely seeing a bit more at that executive end. And look, again, that's a positive sign because it means that organisations are actually probably recognising that they need to have the investment at that level, particularly at that CPO level, the exec director, etc. Really roles that are kind of like, 250, 350 north. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, what we've really seen is a lot of organisations strip those roles out of functions because unfortunately, some organisations do see the HR function, the people function, as a non-revenue generator, and they feel like it's not adding any value. Essentially, the bean counters will be like, you know what, there's a couple of million that we can get rid of. So, a pretty kind of, cynical lens, but we know that that does happen. And my take is that literally you can only go so long being a lean function before things start to break. So that might be, wow, we've got a really big wage underpayment issue, we've got a class action against us for whatever it might be. Those sorts of things that take the attention and the noise of the board, that's where you start to go, oh, okay, actually, that's why we need that person who was on 400K or whatever it might be to actually come in and really have that strategic lens, because when you're stuck in the firefighting and the reactionary, you kind of don't get a chance to just, step back out. And I think everyone is probably pretty tired after the last couple of years because it has been restructuring, it's been case management, it's been lots of workplace relations, it's been psychosocial, all of that stuff. So everyone's probably feeling like they need a little bit of a break. So great to see a little bit more investment coming through. How it's playing out in the States in terms of what's happening nationally. So Victoria, obviously, we've been a little slow. I think we're starting to come back online now. New South Wales seems to be probably moving at a similar pace to us. Queensland market is certainly very busy at the moment. Not surprisingly, obviously, there's a huge amount of investment there in terms of infrastructure and projects. So obviously with the Olympics, that's a really long lead time. So that's doing fairly well at the moment. WA, South Australia, pretty smaller markets, but essentially WA is ticking along quite nicely at the moment. SA is pretty quiet. So a little bit more investment in the SA space would be nice. Obviously, the people over there. What I would say in terms of the themes at the moment and talking to, people, I think there's a couple of themes that are coming up. Everyone's still asking the AI question. And what I'd say about AI is that, if you look at what's happening in your organisation, it's probably not dissimilar to ours and not dissimilar to a lot of organisations. Everyone's using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it might be. There's personal productivity. So everyone's doing the incremental stuff. We've got note takers, all of the kind of little stuff that absolutely makes an impact. And particularly HR is a very manual function at times because, we have to record things and we have to document things. So that's been fantastic and that's great. But in terms of really meaningful material change at scale, Nobody's doing it. So what I mean by that is, everyone thinks everyone else is doing something, but the reality is the numerous organizations, the numerous leaders I talk to, they're all asking what's everyone else doing, and they're all going, oh, well, we use, ChatGPT or whatever. The reality is there's a lot of hype about it. If you think about it, AI has been in our world for probably, 3 years now. I don't think we have seen the full effect, the full ROI. I think there is a lot of noise around it. Don't get me wrong. It is going to impact the future. And certainly if you've got kids, they're certainly going to do very different roles to the ones we do. But at this stage, I just don't see the uptake being massive. I mean, unless you're Amazon and you've been investing in it for 15 years, of course you're going to be ahead of the game. But here in Australia, we also have lots of regulation. So there's compliance, there's regulation, there's privacy laws, there's a lot of stuff. So you've got to think about all that information that gets entered into, say, a ChatGPT, an LLM. All of that information is visible and accessible. So there's quite a few sort of, things to be considered. So just wanted to answer that question because we get it a lot. And I think it's also hard. I think I've spoken to a lot of, CPOs, and they're like, I'm kind of being expected to answer the AI question, and that's kind of like, and it's true, a lot of people are, and it's kind of like, I don't really think that's like HR's role, if that makes sense. So I think that's an executive decision. Obviously, it impacts people and the workforce from that side of things, but I think HR certainly has enough on their plate. I don't think that's something that they need to be focused on at the moment. So anyway, that's just my take in terms of AI. We might, I'm thinking we might jump into questions because we're probably hitting that now. So let's just jump on in and see what people are saying. I'm just going to jump in and kick off here. Oh, we've got quite a few here. So, yeah, good question. Do you anticipate the recent interest rate hike that we've had will impact the job market activity we've seen so far? Yeah, good question. Look, realistically, no. Obviously, it'd be nice if we didn't have a rate hike. Nobody with a mortgage wants that. But the reality is they're still very low. Contextually, you need to look at the bigger picture. So if we look across the globe, what's happening, they're still incredibly low. So, I remember getting a mortgage back in the day and I was paying 8% and I was like, oh my God, that's so low. So, do I think it's going to impact the job market? No. I think that, we haven't had an interest rate rise in 2 years. So it was kind of expected. We really do need to tame inflation if we ever want to stop paying ridiculous prices for everyday things. So I think it's, bearing in mind, I hope we don't get another one at the next, meeting, but I suspect that kind of a lot of people had already kind of baked that in. So, I don't think that's going to have a material impact in terms of what's happening out there at the moment. Okay, so what advice would you give HR leaders feeling stuck or unsure in the current market? Yep, common question, get this all the time. So literally just chatting with someone this morning, what I would say is job hunting at the executive end, you never want to leave it to the last minute. You never want to leave it to the point that you are like, oh my God, I'm so over this place. It takes time. When you're earning 250, 350, 400, whatever it might be, it takes time. The jobs are not there every day. They come up maybe once every month or 2 months, and they're going to be competitive. So what you really need to do is start looking way ahead of time. So I'm talking like 12 months at least, because it will take you 6 to 12 months, all things being equal. And at the executive end, you're going to be fussy. It's got to be the right location, the right leadership, it's got to be the right board, all those sorts of things are going to matter. It's not like the level of, say BP's at 120, 130. They can put themselves on the market and they'll have a job in 6 weeks, Very, very different kind of approach. So I think if you're starting to feel a little bit stuck or a little bit unsure, start having those conversations. If you can, be honest with your leader and kind of just talk about how you're feeling, that's a really good thing to do, because sometimes they have no idea. It is difficult at that executive end because you really are, we're relying on movement in the market. And what tends to happen is, in an organization, we are reliant on people moving, and people only move when they feel confident. So, I always joke about like the exec job search is a little bit like buying a house. You can be ready to make a move and you put yourself on the market and literally there's absolutely no housing stock to choose from. So no one controls the market. Yeah, sure, there's the economic and the geopolitical stuff, but at the end of the day, nobody can really control that. So what I would say is, always be networking. You just never know when that opportunity might happen, because literally at the executive end, people don't apply for jobs, they get tapped on the shoulder. I would say 50% of the executive roles in market, they're just being literally headhunted from people that they've previously worked with, and it's people that they have either have networks or they've become known in the market. So I think that's definitely a really good thing to do if you are potentially at that executive end. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time before you really kind of hit the next kind of button to move on. Okay, interesting. Business partner roles becoming more strategic again, or are they still absorbing operational work? Yeah, look, it's probably a little early to tell. I still think there's probably a lot of hangover from the last couple of years where the BPs are expected to do everything. Literally change management, DEI, rolling out psychosocial, etc. I think a lot of the specialist COE functions have been dialed back, and that's meant that the BPs are taking on a lot more. I know organisations that literally just have a workplace relations team and a BP team and nothing else. So, you can see that, the pro BPs are taking on a lot. I'd like to think that with the advent of more kind of specialist roles and COE roles coming into the market, that will hopefully free up kind of the BPs to really kind of be a bit more strategic, because the challenge obviously with BP roles is that you get pulled in a lot of different directions, right? And if you don't have a COE team that are designing and developing some of those initiatives that you're going to implement, that just means you get stuck doing the very reactive stuff, which of course takes all the noise. The strategic planning stuff, that just doesn't happen. So resourcing is also an issue. I think you just need to have teams that are effectively resourced, and you need to have different levels of capability as well. So you've got to have, a couple of seniors, a couple of mid, a couple of juniors. What I'd suggest to organisations, if you are, you're looking at your team structure, and if you can afford to, I would really make sure you've got good succession in place, right? Don't have like an advisor and then a senior BP, because when that senior BP leaves, that advisor's not going to be ready to step in. So really have thought about what the structure and the succession looks like from that side of things. So I think that's super important. Okay, so what's happening with flexibility and hybrid work? Yep, good question. Yeah, so constantly a topic of conversation. Look, it's still by and large the 3 days in office, 2 from home. I'm not going to lie, there is definitely organisations who are making noise about maybe doing a 4th day in the office, and there is certainly organisations that are doing 5 days a week in the office. Look, what I would say is that it always comes from the top. It's coming from exec, it's coming from the board. Not going to cast aspersions, but generally there's a cohort that like to see people in the office because that's what they're used to and that's what they did. We know that flexibility is super important. People will take a drop in salary for a role that has flexibility. So that's just a given. I don't think we're ever going to go back to full-time 5 days in the office. And what I'd say for those organisations that are wanting people back in the office 5 days a week, you have to pay a premium. That's a reality. No one's willingly going to choose 5 days in the office. It's just not something that people are kind of willing to do, just while there's choice. While there's choice, if there was no choice, very different story, but the reality is there's choice. So, and you're going to have a much smaller pool to choose from, because at the end of the day, the great people are going to have options, and you can be guaranteed that they're going to take, the hybrid and the flexibility. So it's still a thing, absolutely. Still, discussions are ongoing, as we should say. Okay, which sectors are showing genuine momentum going into 26 and which are still cautious? Yep, good question. The market is always sector dependent. So no surprises. It's the sectors that are, stable, can't be offshored, can't be outsourced, not impacted by AI materially. So we're talking things like healthcare, and in healthcare, again, super broad remit, everything from hospitals, private healthcare, pharmaceutical, the list goes on. Then you've got infrastructure. We love to build stuff here in Victoria, so tunnels, bridges, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's still leaning on. And infrastructure, that could be things like data centres. It might be, housing. There's a lot of stuff under that infrastructure banner. So that's still ticking along at the moment. I would also say energy is probably a really big sector. Clearly, we're going through the energy transition at some point, which means the whole decarbonisation, which means we've got to get off oil and gas, which means, you know, renewables, etc. So again, infrastructure, they could be building solar farms, wind farms, again, all tied into that. So energy is definitely going through a transition. What I would say is, you know, again, this probably plays out a little in the market in terms of what we're seeing. It's probably size of organisations. There's certainly organisations in the energy sector that are not doing well. And the reality is that's organisations that probably have been a bit fat and lazy, to be honest, and probably haven't cottoned on to the shifts in consumer demand and behaviour. So, you know, a big legacy oil and gas provider might be struggling, but then you've got, you know, sexy little kind of renewable business, and they're probably doing very, very well. So there's differences across the market. Retail seems to be standing up pretty well, actually. So certain pockets of retail, it's not, you know, discretionary high-end retail. We're talking everything from, you know, consumer items, your daily staples, your, you know, your grocery retail. Those guys are all kind of shooting out the lights, so doing really well there. A little bit slower probably in things like professional services, so your big four, financial services, so that's your insurance, your banking. There's not a lot of stuff coming out of those spaces at the moment. You know, the challenge for those guys is that they're big, they're scalable. They probably will absolutely look to implement things like AI when you've got a workforce of 50 or 60,000. You've got to find, you know, you've got to find costs somewhere, particularly if their share prices are not moving and not growing. The market's going to demand that, you know, there's some form of, you know, return there. So those sectors are a little challenged at the moment. So I would say also transport, logistics, supply chain, all of those are doing quite well as well. So, and there's certainly pockets across the board. In terms of size of organisations, it's that sweet spot of probably 500 to 5,000. So definitely seeing the growth in that space. That's an interesting one. I get this a lot as well. Have you noticed if candidates are more mature, or if they're more mature, are they being rejected in favour of younger candidates? Look, I probably have a different perspective, and I get it. Look, age discrimination, 100%, it's real, right? And you know, it works both ways, younger people and older people. But what I would also say is that senior people are expensive. You know, if you're earning 250 above, you're expensive. Of course they're going to take a resource at 120 or 130. They're cheaper. Like that's just a reality. So I know sometimes it feels like there's that ageism. You know, I think it's more to do with the fact that those people are expensive, and it's incredibly competitive at that level. So I think, you know, not discounting the discrimination, yes, that's a real thing. I'm sure that's there. But I also think, you know, when you're an expensive cost for a business, that absolutely is something that they will be factoring in. Okay, just, oh God, I'm conscious of time, but I think here we go. This is a good one. Do you foresee IR practitioners stepping into CPO roles? Yeah, good question. I would definitely say out of the specialisations, IR, workplace relations, always get a front seat. Now, what I mean by that is, if you think about it, you know, organisations, CEOs, etc., risk is front of mind for them. So when it comes to the really complex landscape that we have at the moment across the market, of course, that's super you know, important for them. So I have probably seen out of all of the specializations, it's workplace relations that does step up to the CPO. Because if you think about it, the CPO is managing risk, and the most prescient thing for a board and for directors is risk. Now, it's not to say that your OD or your talent person is going to, you know, step into the CPO role, but in my experience, 25 years of doing this, I've only ever seen IR people step into CPO roles. Now, I know CPOs probably don't want to hear that, but it's true. They do have that capability to step into it, particularly if it's an environment that is heavily unionized, you know, 80% of it is workplace relations, then of course, spot on. Or they're going to go with a CPO that's got a deep vein of expertise in that area. So that's it. Okay, just jumping around. There's a bunch of questions. I'm just trying to find. Oh, here we go. This is a good one. Let's have a quick switch. This one's about EVP. Okay, have you heard any whispers from HR leaders about any intentions to focus on EVP or Oh, sorry, that's my dog just popping in. So hi everyone, that's Sadie. EVP, intentions and employer branding. Yeah. What, are they interested? Are they investing? Are they taking a priority? Oh, God, it's a great question. Look, I feel like it's really funny. It's like things were super focused. We were over here. We were doing all this amazing stuff, you know, after COVID or during COVID, etc. And then everyone just kind of went, oh, we're not going to do any talent engagement, OD, EVP. We're just going to do like risk and compliance. So I don't know is the question, to be honest. I'm not hearing a lot at this point in time, bearing in mind it is literally only the 6th of February, so we've still got time. But based on kind of, you know, my take on that is probably, given that we're starting to see more OD, more people focused on TA, it's pretty much tied to that. It also goes back to whether there is, you know, if it's a competitive market, like think back to, you know, COVID times. Everyone was talking about employer branding and EVP because it was so damn hard to attract people. So you had to, do you know what I mean? Like people pulling out all stops. Then they kind of didn't need to because the market kind of tanked. So it's a bit of a needs basis. So my gut is that they will probably start talking about that again. And I think we'll start to see a little bit more investment there at the moment. And look, things are different. You know, what people wanted 5 years ago, 6 years ago, completely different. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, people don't just want, you know, drinks on a Friday and, you know, a pool table. Do you know what I mean? They want, you know, menopause leave or whatever it might be, you know, IVF support or whatever it might be, like, you know, and different cohorts. I think what we're probably going to start seeing is different benefits and different attraction points for different cohorts of the market. The Gen Zs, your boomers, your Xs, it's all going to probably look quite different. So great question. And I have just, yeah, I really hope we're going to see a little bit more of this. I'm just going to go see if there's any more. Here we go. Yes, Sadie made an appearance. Okay, I think we've probably got time for one more question. So the next episode, we'll pop it in the link, but it's going to be on Friday, March the 6th. Networking. Okay. Your point about networking. When people say DM me, there's radio silence on LinkedIn. What's your tips on this? Yeah, okay. So look, I do go on about networking, and networking is hard because I know everyone's busy and they haven't got the time, but honestly, when you come to the job search, every person, if I had $1 for every time someone says, oh, I really should network more, it's really important. It's like going to see the dentist. You don't want to do it, but you really do need to do it. So you don't have to do it every week, but just try and attend some events. Try and hit up people that are, you know, try and get someone to introduce you. Do you know what I mean? And look, everyone's busy. Look, you know, if they don't get back to you, don't take it as like, oh, no one talk to me. People are busy. I get millions of DMs, like literally. Yes, I'll get back to everyone, but it might take me a couple of weeks. So don't be turned off. That's all I would say. And like try and make a game out of it. Do you know what I mean? Like just try and, you know, connect, etc. You're not going to connect with everyone. You're not going to vibe with everyone. Don't just go and target like the Meccas and the DJs of the world. Like go and target, you know, the career organizations. What you want to do is just kind of, you know, meet some people that can, you know, potentially share some war stories, and, you know, down the track, you never know where that may lead. So look, I'm probably going to wrap it up on that because I think we're getting out of time. So thank you so much for joining. This is always super fun. We always have a few technical glitches. As you can tell, this is live, no pre-recorded, but really appreciate everyone tuning in. And for the questions, it keeps me on my toes. It gives me an idea of what's happening in the market and what you guys care about. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, the next episode is going to be on Friday, March 6th. So if everyone can tune in then, we love doing this. So thanks so much for joining in. See you, everyone.